The cost of petrol's gone through the roof. It might be best not to get into the politics behind that, otherwise YouTube will probably ban us for excessive use of bad language. However, me and Jeannie McIntosh decided that it might be better for us to stick closer to home for this episode. And you don't get much closer than Bleasdale Circle, Wyre Borough's most important archaeological monument, set at the foot of the natural amphitheatre of Faresnape Fell and Parlick Pike. As close as it might be to home, however, Bleasdale Circle is still a hike from the former Bleasdale Cafe / post office, now a private residence that for some reason insists on calling itself the Smithy, presumably because the old post office doesn't sound grand designs enough. We spent many hours at the cafe in our youth, where the upstairs toilet was probably the smallest public convenience on the planet. You had to inch yourself in backwards through a 3-foot door. The old post office, as was, had a red telephone box outside it back then, now lost to posterity or auctioned off on eBay or something. The ample parking seems to have been privatised these days as well. Presumably the new owners hold a lot of wife-swapping parties. Quick legal disclaimer, obviously this isn't true. We were just annoyed that we couldn't find anywhere to stick the car, that's all. After ripping half her chassis off on a strategically placed limestone rock, don't get me started on Jeannie McIntosh's driving, we moored up the remains of the old jalopy at the entrance to the private road leading to the aforementioned circle. There's a lot of private stuff around Bleasdale, private footpaths, private incomes, private lives, private signs. Cars will be towed away, slow children will be exterminated. From there it was a 4-hour Zimmer scramble up the private sign-infested track that led to the village, if it can be classified as a village. It's the sort of weirdly silent place where you'd expect to find a half-constructed wicker man in the woodshed. It's got a school, though God only knows who supplies the children, a village hall, where dogs aren't allowed. They don't seem to like anyone around these parts. A couple of former farms and St. Edmund's, a building as void of imagination and gregariousness as its residents. St. Edmund's, named after the Northumbrian monk who discovered Durham Cathedral, although nobody seems to know why, was completely rebuilt in 1835. It had been hanging around in a ruinous state for centuries, however. In fact, according to the Victoria County history, in 1610 it was described as a chapel without service, and in 1650 had neither minister nor maintenance, and the people were declared as being ignorant and careless. From St. Edmund's it was apparently another 40-odd mile hike across cattle grids and landmines to the concessionary path, very generous of them, outside Vicarage Farm that led unsignposted for once. Funny how the plethora of signposts suddenly vanished around this juncture, across Admarsh to the circle itself. It was worth the spine-cracking ramble though, the Bronze Age timber henge set within its tranquil woodland, being one of the most mystical and enchanted ancient monuments you could ever imagine. At least, it used to be. The scene that actually greeted us when we finally located it was reminiscent of the Somme after a thermonuclear device had been detonated. It seems that a force 400 gale blew most of the trees down last year before Wyre Borough Council finished the job off once and for all. As devastating and as devastated as it was, however, we probably ought to furnish our viewer with some facts. Bleasdale Circle was excavated in 1899 by the intriguingly named Shadrach Jackson, whose parents either had a dreadful sense of humour or had won the name off the back of a cornflakes packet. Although nowadays the original wooden pillars have been replaced by replicas, currently buried beneath the debris left behind by Wyre Borough Council's bomb disposal experts, during the Bronze Age the site consisted of 2 structures. A large outer circle of posts surrounded an embankment, which in turn surrounded a ditch. The ditch encircled a tumulus, on the top of which stood a smaller circle of wooden columns with a splayed entrance. In the centre of all this was a shallow grave containing 3 burial urns. There are many theories concerning Bleasdale Circle, most of which involve lining up the 3rd stump from the right with the notch on Parlick Fell, or the 8th stump on the left with some nearby sheep or some other rubbish, but nobody really knows. Unable to fully process the destruction of not only the Wyre's most important bit of ancient history, but a linchpin in my own life as well, we trucked defiantly back to the car, stuffed ourselves full of potted beef butties, and headed off in search of Bleasdale Tower. This involved another arduous hike, made all the more difficult by the general lack of signs. We've come across friendlier and more helpful communities, it must be said. However, after what seemed like several months psychologically, after our calves had started to knot together with more ferocity than Anne Widdecombe's face, it transpired that Bleasdale Tower was just an ordinary house designed by William Garnett of Salford in the mid-19th century. Presumably, the reason why it's classified as a tower is because it's the only 3-storey building in the district. We collapsed in a hedge and ate the last of our polony sausage butties. Then, consulting our Ordnance Survey Land Ranger Series map, we discovered that not far away as the determined crow flies, heading back towards Bleasdale Village, was something known as Brooks Bridge, a landmark important enough to be written on the map in Gothic lettering. We hauled ourselves back onto our Zimmers with a great deal of swearing and headed off through a pleasant if not expensive looking landscape, past a pointless manicured triangle of turf dominated by the sign "Keep Off the Grass." If only whoever had erected the sign had been so conscientious about Bleasdale Circle. Brooks Bridge, we discovered, was and probably still is an ancient packhorse bridge. Well, a packhorse bridge at any rate. It's probably not ancient, just about visible through the brambles from its modern counterpart, but still isolated in a back garden that screams "Get off my land before I shoot you with a 12-bore." So we carried on walking, struggling to complete the circular tour, past the Lantern and Larks. Don't ask, I haven't got a clue. With its sign that had assured us on the way up its drive was not accessible to cars, a statement that clearly wasn't true and would have saved us several hours of back-twisting struggle if it hadn't been there, until we reached the car again, creaking with cramp and wheezing like asthmatic weevils. Then we went home. After some deliberation, we decided that next week we'll probably go for an ice cream in Southport instead.
Down in the meadow where the windows screen, in the middle of a field from the lightning tree. Its limbs all torn from the day it was born, for the tree was born in a thunderstorm. Grow, grow, the lightning tree, it's never too late for